Hello, so today we're going to be talking about the periodization in indoor volleyball and how a season should be periodized in order to achieve the highest performance possible from the athletes. Now, as you may know, periodization is the division of different training periods over a given time frame, with each training period having a specific focus or target relative to where an athlete or team is within their season and how close to or far out from competition they are. In this video, we'll be looking at periodization for an indoor volleyball team, which consists of 14 athletes across 5 different positions. Now, these positions are middle blockers, setters, liberos, outside hitters, and opposites. The main considerations in periodization of training between different athlete positions is their load management across any given microcycle. Jumping load is the main factor in the periodization of training, as this is the most taxing component of volleyball on an athlete's body. So for instance, middle blockers will jump an average of 2 times more than any other given player. Therefore, their jumps will often need to be periodized across trainings throughout a microcycle to avoid any overuse, injuries, or excessive loading which may lead to injury. On the other end of the spectrum, we have liberos who don't jump at all, so they can often complete longer sessions with a higher repetition count without any of these risk factors of injury. Now, the starting 6, or the players that played most of the game on the weekend, will sometimes or often have a lighter training session for the first training session back after a game, whereas the athletes who didn't play as much or at all will generally have a heavier session because their bodies aren't as fatigued from the load of a game. Now, before we go into the ideal periodization of an indoor volleyball team, we need to look at the season for a volleyball team and what the season entails competition-wise. A typical indoor season for a professional team begins with pre-season in the beginning of August. Competition begins generally around the start of October, and if a team makes it all the way to the finals at the end of the season will finish in May. This provides us with about a 10-month-long season to work on the team's training schedule and how it should be periodized to allow for optimal performance for the team as a whole. Due to the seasonal nature of indoor volleyball, a single macro cycle will last for 1 year. The preparatory period for the macro cycle for an indoor volleyball team is anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks long. This shorter than usual preparatory period is due to a larger amount of volleyball athletes coming straight from the international season where they compete for their countries to their respective clubs for the regular season. Due to this, the focus of the preparatory period is usually more centered around building team cohesion on top of some strength and power development before the competition phase of the season begins. The competition phase for indoor volleyball lasts for around 30 weeks, dependent on the success of a team. The microcycles for weight training within the competition phase will vary between maintenance to avoid fatigue and soreness for competition, and short bouts of heavier lifting for improvement when a team may have a bye week with no game and a small window for improvement may present itself. Some further considerations for competition phase in volleyball season is the extra competitions that teams play. In general, every league will have a tournament around mid-season where all teams compete in multiple games over a few days to compete for the cup of that league, which is a separate competition to the regular season itself. Microcycles around this time will need to consider the greatly increased load of the athletes with multiple back-to-back games across a few short days, compared to the regular 1 game per week on a weekend. Finally, the transition period of the macro cycle for indoor volleyball will generally be around 10 weeks. However, for those who go straight to national team season, there can sometimes be almost no transitional period, and they will be almost immediately going straight into competition again, with maybe 1 to 2 weeks after finishing their season of break beforehand. After looking at the breakdown of a macro cycle for indoor volleyball, we can see that the periodization of training is extremely critical for volleyball athletes due to the varying nature of competition throughout their season, and for some, it's a case of almost no recovery time or transition period due to their national team commitments. Now, breaking that large macro cycle down into smaller mesocycles, the mesocycle for indoor volleyball will typically last around 8 weeks or 2 months. The initial mesocycle is the 2 months of pre-season training before the competition phase begins. This mesocycle involves a much heavier gym program accompanied with court trainings that are more skills and fitness based. The gym program will have a heavy focus on building as much strength and power as possible, with 3 to 4 gym sessions per week in order for the athletes to have the strongest base possible leading into the beginning of their competitive season. Court sessions will also be unique in the sense that they will often be focused on intense repetitive efforts and multiple repetitions of skill work in order to increase endurance levels and skill levels so that the athletes are as fit as possible before the season commences. The next 4 mesocycles will be almost the same despite some smaller microcycle adjustments that may occur based on potential extra tournament games over a specific weekend throughout the regular season. Now these mesocycles will taper down the gym work to around 2 to 3 sessions per week compared to the previous 3 to 4 sessions per week in the preseason mesocycle. These gym sessions will also switch focus to maintenance of the improvements gained throughout the preseason mesocycle rather than trying to continue making improvements, which is taxing on the body. One of the 3 gym days will also have a focus on injury preventative exercises that aren't designed for improving strength or power. The court sessions for these mesocycles will also switch from the more intense endurance targeted trainings and specific skill trainings, and will have a large focus on tactical gameplay and fine-tuning the systems that the team want to utilize throughout the season in order to win their games. Now for the most important part of periodization in indoor volleyball, which is the microcycles. Now these microcycles will generally have a roughly similar structure to each other, but are very flexible and often change based on factors such as previous games played, upcoming games, athlete load management, and a team's short-term goals or objectives. Now to break this down into more detail, microcycles may change when different training strategies need to be implemented for an upcoming game that are based on the scouting of the opponent, or another factor being the load management of players, which is crucial and will change constantly across microcycles at different points throughout the season. There will be times where certain athletes will require a longer period of rest or an altered training due to soreness or small injuries. These training sessions will need to be adaptable in order to both cater to the rest of the team and specific athletes that may not be able to participate or fully participate. A study on within-week variations of intensities in training by Lima and colleagues looked at the intensities of training sessions within microcycles of professional male volleyball athletes through the use of an RPE scale, which is the player's rate of perceived exertion. The one consistent finding across all the microcycles observed was that the number of jumps and the RPE were always higher in the training sessions further away from game day. And as game day got closer, the jump loads and intensities of trainings reduced. This is a form of tapering of training, which allows the athletes to be both as physically and mentally prepared for their match as possible, because it reduces the chance of underperforming due to fatigue. Now, what I've prepared here on the screen, it might be considered a typical in-season microcycle for volleyball, which would be weights training sessions on a Tuesday and Thursday in the morning for around 2 hours, and non-jumping or extremely light jumping court sessions on Monday, Wednesday and Friday mornings for around 1 hour. Now the main court sessions would be Monday through to Friday every afternoon for between 1.5 to 2 hours, scaling down as game day approaches, along with the time of the training being adjusted for the time of the game that week. So as we can see, the training here on Friday evening is at the same time as the game is scheduled to start on Saturday evening. Now the Saturday of course is game day, and that's in the evening, and it may also involve a light 1 hour morning training session for the athletes, just so that they can familiarize themselves with the gym that they will be competing in, and it will be a very low intensity training with the main purpose of just moving the body around in a game environment. Sunday would then be the rest day, of course, for the athletes to recover. Now for some other things to think about, in professional sport, athletes undertake testing before and throughout the season. The main tests for indoor volleyball athletes are counter movement jump height testing, force platform testing, and speed testing. These tests are generally conducted once every mesocycle. This testing initially creates a baseline for the athletes at the beginning of the season and allows for the tracking of their progress throughout the season, and can be used to ensure no athlete is regressing or underperforming. If an athlete's testing is consistently getting worse, the data can be used to figure out what change in training modalities may need to occur to better help that individual athlete. Volleyball teams also often use verts to manage loading of players. Now, a vert is a small device worn around the waist of an athlete that counts jumps and jump heights of each jump. The loading of players can easily be managed through the use of verts, and they can also be used to assess how players are travelling throughout a game or training and track potential fatigue levels based on the average jump height as a training or game progresses. Thank you for watching this video. I hope this dive into the periodization of volleyball teams will be helpful for you and getting the best out of your athletes.